What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. Right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weiss.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of P90X, Tony Horton, Baby Einstein founder, Julie Clark, Atari founder, and many, many more, and how they overcome big challenges in life and business. Today's episode, this is going to be a little bit different episode actually today. I had an amazing entrepreneur, and he actually invited me to interview him for his podcast, and it was so good. I said, can you please let me release this on mine? And so it's going to be Craig Weiss, who's the co-founder of Retainer Club and Mouthguard Club. And he also talks about growing a company to $1 billion valuation in 3 years and testifying in front of the U.S. Senate, raising $200 million, being featured in the Wall Street Journal, and much, much more. So stay tuned. This is actually where I interviewed him for his podcast. Now, if you're an orthodontist or dentist or know someone, you'll definitely want to send this to them. And if you are not an orthodontist or dentist, it's still very valuable. Just you can skip through the sponsorship message because it does not apply to you. But today's episode is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. At Rise 25, we help B2B businesses connect to their Dream 100 clients and referral partners, and we help you run your podcast so it generates ROI. As people have listened, if you've listened to this before, podcasting is much more personal to me, and it was inspired by my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, and him and his brother were concentration camps in Nazi Germany and were the only members to survive. But his legacy lives on because the Holocaust Foundation did an interview with him, which you can watch on my About page. So yes, podcasting will help your business. It's been the best thing for my business and my life in general, but it helps you and your guests leave a legacy. So if you have questions, I believe any business should have a podcast. So if you have questions, you can email us support@rise25media.com or learn more, go to rise25.com. John and I made a video and we even left in the outtakes. So now check out today's episode.
Craig Weiss here, the co-host of the In Your Face podcast, where we discuss stories of building a thriving business in today's competitive marketplace. I scaled up a consumer business to over $1 billion valuation, and now with my friend and business partner, Dr. Blair Feldman, who was a practicing orthodontist for 20 years, we now help orthodontists grow their practice. Today, I have Jeremy Weiss here, who has done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs, investors, and CEOs, and we flipped the script. Today, Jeremy's going to be the one interviewing me. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it. And, you always say so casually, growing a company to $1 billion valuation. We're going to dig into that today. And that's what I'm excited about. Growing a company to $1 billion valuation in 3 years, testifying in front of the U.S. Senate, and raising $200 million. And the Wall Street Journal interviewed you too. We're going to talk all about that. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by Mouthguard Club and Retainer Club. Both services help drive new patients, reactivations, and referrals to your orthodontic or dental office. Mouthguard Club provides personalized custom mouthguards that are perfectly fitted for your teeth. Not to mention, you can fully customize the design, even put your team logo on it. It's one of the best fitting performing mouthguards available. You can go to mouthguardclub.com/partner for more information. And Retainer Club is the easiest way for orthodontists to provide patients with perfectly fitting retainers at a great price. Oftentimes, orthodontic offices don't even have a price point to meet what Retainer Club provides. And so, also they send you a steady stream of new patients in your office who are actively interested in getting treatments. And over 1,000 patients already love Retainer Club. It's easy to use online services to order and replace your retainers without taking up your staff time. So orthodontists love Retainer Club because their long-term fans continue to refer new patients to their office. And plus, the smiles they are creating are actually being maintained. So you can learn more, become a partner office to bring in more patients, make more money. Go to retainerclub.com/partner. So, with this, Craig, we have a lot of stuff to cover with this $1 billion valuation. But I want to kind of start early on because you said earlier, I was slow on this entrepreneurial journey, okay? And you have an unorthodox journey. So talk a little bit about, and you even made the comment, unusual family background. So I need to hear, for one, what that means.
So, I grew up in, I think, a very unique situation in that my mom, mom and dad were married for 50 years. And my mom gave birth to children in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And
Wow.
she had 7 children across 4 decades. And
She must
on
be an
top,
amazing woman. That
so,
sounds insane.
yeah. So on top of everything else, she was a federal judge for 25 years, probably the only female federal judge in the United States who had 7 children. And as one of my brothers used to joke, and would you believe it was all with the same father? Um, and so, we had this weird family because the first 5 children were born in 5 years and 3 months with no twins. And then 8 years later, me, and then 8 years later, my little brother. So I had this strange upbringing in that the closest sibling to me in either direction was 8 years, which, it's all of high school and all of college. It's a big gap. So I had this weird kind of only child upbringing with 6 siblings. Um, so and there's this whole grouping of my 5 older siblings are between 8 and 13 years older than me. And so it was unusual in a lot of different ways. And I guest lecture at WP Carey, the business school here at Arizona State University, the largest university in the United States. And when I sort of talk to them and I tell them my story, the irony is I'm guest lecturing in the business school, so it's either MBA students or exec MBA students typically. Sometimes the seniors taking entrepreneurship, and I usually start my story with kindergarten. And so it's just kind of a fun place to start. And so I tell the story that one of my good friends here in town is a board certified neurosurgeon. And his mom, over 40 years ago, was my preschool teacher when I was in, preschool and kindergarten. And so he once said to me, Craig, I grew up on stories about you in my home. And I said, well, what do you mean you grew up with stories about me? Like that doesn't make any sense. Why would your mom be telling stories about some kid in her kindergarten class? Like what story could there be to tell? And he said, oh, well, she would tell me, it's so interesting. Like all these little kids in my class, when it comes time for lunch, they take out their little brown paper bags and, they'd have their little PB&Js with the crust cut off and their little baggie with, carrot sticks. But there's this one little boy and he's got like a can of Coke and a chocolate chip cookie. And so she said, he's like a total free agent, and like all the other kids are like, how do I get on this program? And so when I tell the story, I say, look, I was the 6th of 7 children.
You were packing your own lunch? What was going on?
Yeah, clearly my parents had given up on child raising at this point, and I must have been packing my own lunch. And so, back in kindergarten. And so I sort of say, look, from an early age, I obviously was, trying to figure things out on my own. I do remember when I actually genuinely try to think back to my first kind of entrepreneurial moment. I do remember it actually. I was in elementary school and I was, like a lot of little boys at the time had baseball cards and was into baseball cards. And I remember reading about like the most valuable baseball card at the time, not like historically, but like during my, like the card that would have been sort of contemporaneous.
Most coveted time, card during your time.
Yeah, was the Don Mattingly 1984 Don Ross baseball card, and it was like $100. And I remember that when the card first came out, it was like a penny, and you could buy them for a penny, and now it was worth $100. And I sort of did the math in my head, and I'm like, wait a second, that means this thing went up, 100 times 100, right? It was like a 10,000, % increase in price. And I was like, well, so there's a lot of money to be made. I mean, if I'd bought all those Don Mattingly cards at a penny, like, wow, I could make so much money. And so what if I could predict what's the next card that's now worth not that much, but that could be worth a fortune? And I did all this kind of research and I came to the conclusion that there was this one card. And it was the Bo Jackson rookie baseball card. Here's a 2-sport star, and the card that came out was this 1986, Topps card that was part of their extended rookie card. So there weren't that many of them. And I went to my dad with this idea that I could get them for, $1, $2, and I thought they'd be worth a lot of money. And my dad, just totally supported the whole idea, the strategy, everything. And he would come with me to baseball card shows and we'd start buying them up. And I remember, I bought 1,000 of these cards.
Wow.
And, spending, call it, a couple of $1,000s with the thought, hey, if these things go up to $100 or more, there's some real money here. And then for those who remember, he had this devastating career-ending, injury, this super freak injury, and he went from this incredible two-sport star to, that was it. He was kind of done, and my investment in essence kind of went down the drain. And my dad was just, never for a second made me feel bad that, it was sort of a bad investment or that it didn't work out. I think he was just totally supportive that I had this idea and a strategy, and hey, you can't control all the outcomes, but that he was so supportive of it. So I think that was sort of for me, my first sort of taste of being an entrepreneur. But after that,
I'm surprised you didn't just dominate the stock market with that mindset.
Yeah, well, it is funny because I do. It's funny you bring up the stock market because there's a few stock market stories in terms of my my development, both as an entrepreneur and just personally. So if we remember, we'll circle back to them. But
what did your dad do, Craig?
So my dad was a patent attorney. He was the youngest ever managing patent attorney at IBM, I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York. And then he moved out to Phoenix in the 1970s when I was literally 6 months old to become the general patent attorney for Motorola. And so I grew up in Phoenix as a result of that big move. And then about a little more than 40 years ago, my father founded his own IP firm here in Arizona. The 4 oldest sons, of the 7 kids, the first 2 were girls, the next 5 were boys. So my sister Gail is a funny story. She also was a little bit of a late bloomer. She finished last in her class in high school. And then ended up going to college, to this small college in Ohio, where she became the first person in the 150-year history of the college to triple major. Then she went to Yale and got a PhD in philosophy, and she's now a professor at George Washington University. And then my sister Felicia has a PhD in clinical psychology. And then, so then there's my next set of brothers. My 3 older brothers are all IP attorneys. And I started off also as an IP attorney. I became a patent attorney like my father. And the 4 boys who were all IP attorneys all ended up working for my father at the family firm. And
wow.
But what was funny about that was to be a patent attorney, you have to have a bachelor's of science degree to qualify in order to take the patent bar. And so I was a philosophy major in college. And so I had literally not a single credit towards a bachelor's of science degree. And so after law school, I literally had to go back to school to take the equivalent of a bachelor's of science degree, in my case, in biology and chemistry. So I did that.
Why philosophy?
So I grew up.
Yeah, I mean, you went to Penn, and you're like, I'm going to major in philosophy.
So, it's funny. I was always interested in philosophy. I was reading books all throughout high school. I loved Marcus Aurelius, Meditations on First Philosophy, fascinating sort of Stoic philosopher. I don't know. I was always kind of fascinated by the way, sort of taking a step back and how do things work? How do people interact? What motivates people to do what they do? How does society kind of get structured? And in some ways, law was an extension of that curiosity. I remember my first year of law school, it felt like I was putting on a different set of glasses. Like, okay, so we all have to interact, but there have to be sort of rules that govern how we interact. And then if you break those rules, there have to be consequences. And
so it came in handy.
It came in handy. I've often felt that the philosophy studies have come in handy in many aspects of my life, in terms of just it helps you learn how to think. And of course, you have to do a lot of reading, and a lot of writing, and those are good skills to hone as well.
So
but yeah,
why then law? You went on to law school.
so, the funny thing about being a
Your dad
lawyer,
offered you a job. You're
yeah,
like,
it's funny, right? I mean, there's a great, the Nobel Prize winning, he's a psychologist, but he got the Nobel Prize in economics, is Daniel Kahneman.
Hmm.
And he,
Prolific. Yeah. A lot of amazing books he's written too.
yeah,
Yeah.
so really interesting guy. And he has this he's got a book called, I think, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah. It's really long.
Really long and
Yeah.
tedious book to get through, like really important, but not super well written. And he has this sort of, I can't remember if it's in that book or in the better book, which is The Undoing Project, which is Michael Lewis's book about Daniel Kahneman. But
The best stuff is like the books that use his research. Like I think Dan
Totally.
Ariely has them. Probably Michael Lewis had. There's a bunch of really good ones that use his research. Yes.
Totally. So in one of those books, he sort of has this theory that I think is so true, which is that you often can't learn very much about the most important choices people make in their life. You actually can learn a lot more about them by much smaller choices. So for example, what they end up doing for a living might be just kind of what their parents did for a living, which was kind of my story. I became a patent attorney. My dad was a patent attorney. Like he had his own firm. Like I probably didn't think about it as much as I should have. And who you marry is often like who sat next to you, that day in school, right? Like, and so whereas, what kind of law you practice, or other things might be more specific, that are more telling. So in my case, my mom was a lawyer, she was a judge, my dad was a lawyer. I was always argumentative as a kid, so people kept telling me I should be a lawyer. And so I, for a decade, I was a patent attorney and, providing legal services to clients. And I met entrepreneurs every day. Those were my clients. They'd come in with new ideas, and they were generally, exciting people to talk to. They came into my office. They were full of energy. They were pumped up. We were usually one of the first people they met with at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey. So they were still upbeat and enthusiastic and hadn't yet been kind of beaten down by life. And so it was, really positive. And so, but I noticed a few things. One was, I wasn't super happy. Like I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I didn't feel entirely fulfilled professionally. And I don't know that I knew why, but I just felt a little bit like, it was the grind. You have to make a living. So this is my, path, and I'm going to go to work and draft patent applications and, try to get patents for my clients. But it didn't really just get me super pumped up every morning to, race into the office. And so, so I had this, interesting thing. My wife and I, moved to Israel. And so we met on junior year of college abroad in Israel, and she's actually a rabbi. So she had to go back to rabbinical school. So I took a year off between college and law school. We lived for a year in Jerusalem. And then we ended up moving there for 2 more years, between 2000 and 2002. And it was during that time that I met this guy, another American who was living in Israel, this guy, Ellie. And for like the first almost 10 years of our friendship, we were just friends, and we got to know each other and hung out. And eventually when Erica and I returned to the United States, I stayed in touch with Ellie, which, wasn't super convenient to do. This was kind of at the beginning of, of internet and cell
There's also a
phones.
big time difference too.
Yeah, big time difference, but we stayed in touch. And when he would come to America, which he did quite frequently, he would try to swing by Arizona, and we would hang out, or I'd come visit him in other places that he was in Colorado or in other places. And he was a guy that I kind of knew early on, was a serious entrepreneur. He had taken 3 companies from founding to IPO in his 20s. Like just sort of,
Wow.
kind of amazing. And at the time that I met him, he was a venture capitalist and eventually became one of the 10 partners at Benchmark, which was the VC fund behind Twitter and eBay. And so
You better have him on the podcast, by the way.
yeah, so for sure. So about sort of 10 years into my, friendship with Ellie, there was this transition where he went from friend to mentor. And it happened around this, the company that I ended up sort of making my name with. So because it was our own law firm, and because we kind of were meeting with entrepreneurs all the time, we were, you know, a little entrepreneurial ourselves. And so in 2005, my brother Mark, who's also a patent attorney, went to China for a client of our law firms, and he saw a crude version of an electronic cigar, and he thought, you know, this would make a great product, you know, if ever somehow they could get it down to the size of like an actual cigarette. And so he founded this company called Enjoy as a venture of our law firms in late 2006. So on day one, I became, you know, a shareholder, but I wasn't really involved with the company. And my brother Mark, for his part, you know, was also an IP attorney like me, and so he brought in some friends of his who were more business operator types to run the company. And so the company, you know, starts off kind of strong. They do 300 grand of revenue in '07. They do 3 million in '08. They do
Wow.
7 million in '09. They're really starting to grow. And then a couple of sort of few terrible things happened. So in 2008, my father passed away, which was, you know,
Sorry
really
to hear
devastating.
that.
Yeah, no, I appreciated it. It was really devastating, you know, to my whole family. He was, you know, a beloved guy. I had a really close relationship with my dad, and but also he was, you know, the head of the firm. He was the rainmaker. He probably brought in 40% of the clients, and so there was kind of a horrifying realization for me in particular. You know, I was, gosh, 34 years old, and I had a 15-month-old son at the time. And I just had that feeling of I'm up on the tightrope, and, you know, the net's just been pulled out, you know, from under me. Like, you know, my dad was one of those guys that if, you know, he was always going to be there for you. He was always going to make sure you didn't fall. And, but, you know, he was always going to be there for you until he wasn't there for you. Right. Cause he couldn't be. And so, so it was just really terrifying. And I just remember that feeling of fear. And so that happens. And as I'm kind of starting to recover from that, I start to focus on, well, wait a second. I mean, who's going to replace all of this revenue that my dad's generating from the law firm? Like this firm could go under, you know, so I start reading a bunch of business books, and I start joining, like, you know, kind of CEO organizations, and just thinking of the law firm as a business, right? How do I grow this business and keep this business healthy? And so meanwhile, this Enjoy thing on the side is starting to kind of percolate. And so
It sounds more like percolate.
yeah, no,
It
it was
sounds
definitely
very,
but
kicking off.
it was really taking off, but in some respects, like, you know, all the more reason why there was nothing for me to do. Like kind of like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, clearly these people know what they're doing. The company's taking off. I have all these shares, you know, that might solve all of our financial problems. And so, and better yet, I don't even have to do anything, you know, to make that happen. And so, so the first thing that happened was, before my father passed away, our youngest brother was at the time a day trader. And I used to joke that day traders don't really care if stocks go up or down as long as they respond violently. And so, you know, he's the one who kind of started to say, wait a second, you know, these really volatile stocks, some of them are really moving up and down because the companies are involved in, like, you know, bet the company patent litigation. And, like, you know, well, wait a second, my brothers are patent attorneys. If they could, like, read the briefs and go to court and tell me who was going to win, and I know which way to bet, you know, I could make a fortune. And so he comes to, you know, us with this idea. And so, you know, when I went to the University of Pennsylvania, I was studying philosophy in the College of Arts and Sciences, but I had a bunch of friends who were at Wharton, you know, getting business degrees. And so I went to
one of the top schools in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my good friends that I'm still in touch with, I went to, and he was running a hedge fund. And I said, hey, Adam, you know, what do you think of my brother's idea? And he goes, oh, I think it's a great idea. You know, you should do a hedge fund with that. And I said, well, what do you mean do a hedge fund? I'm the philosophy guy. And he's like, no, it's not that complicated. And he walked me through kind of the economics, and here's how you'd get it set up. And this is the lawyers I would recommend you use. And this is the brokerage firm. And so I said, well, would you help? Would you, you know, help us? Would you be a partner? And he said, sure. So we start this hedge fund, you know, in essence on the side of the law practice, because it didn't require a full-time attention, because these occurrences were not that frequent. And so, but it taught me some valuable lessons. I learned about doing something outside of the practice of law, even though it was, tangential to law. I also learned how, kind of how to make very quick decisions with imperfect information and risk management, and also a little bit of fundraising. I had to raise some money, and Adam basically said, "Look, the only way to really make money in a hedge fund is to have institutional investment, people who can write really large checks. And the only way to get institutional investors is to have a track record that you can point to. And the only way to have a track record is to have a track record. So basically, you just got to raise from anybody just to get started, and then you can build your track record." So
that's advice. A
yeah,
life to live by. In order to get a track record, you need a track record or whatever.
exactly. Yeah. It was like a catch-22. So I started raising money, and I raised not a lot of money, like maybe $1.8 million, and mostly family and friends. And
still a large chunk of money for not raising money.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a nice, compelling story to tell, and we started making money doing this hedge fund thing. And so it's just kind of a fun thing on the side. So anyhow, so my father passes away. I'm joining these CEO groups. I'm reading these books, and then on the NJOY side, two terrible things happened. One was the FDA directed U.S. Customs to see shipments of NJOY's products as unapproved drug delivery devices. And around the same time, my brother had a falling out with these friends of his he'd brought in to run the company. So it was just really kind of a terrible kind of double whammy. And so Ellie, my friend, who's turning into my mentor, says, Craig, this electronic cigarette thing seems to be kind of a new trend that's taking off. Your family founded this company, like, kind of, how come you're not more involved in this? And he was the first person to kind of plant that seed. And so I continue to kind of, learn more about it and read more. And Ellie starts to encourage me to take, a more active role. And I ask him to, well, if we're able to retake kind of control over the company from the people that my brother brought in, would you become my chairman of the board? Would you take an active role? And he agreed to do that. And so it's a longer story for perhaps another podcast, but the takeover story is its own crazy story, because we'd given away so many shares that we'd actually lost control over the company. And so it was literally like a hostile takeover.
It's probably more common than people think in across the board.
Yeah, no, I always talk to people about this when I talk to other business school students or other people, other younger entrepreneurs, about making sure you maintain control. And so,
how do you navigate a hostile takeover?
It's a crazy story. Literally, I don't want to go too off topic, but let's just say that there were on June 4th, 2010, there were two groups of shareholders at the annual shareholder meeting. Each group had 51% of the vote. But I had a later dated 51% than the other group. And so I had an off-duty police officer with a gun and a badge for $47 an hour on standby in case people went crazy. And two teams of sort of computer forensic specialists ready to seize laptops and clone hard drives. And it was really like a scene out of a movie. But we retook control over the company at this sort of crazy annual shareholder meeting. And then Ellie gave me a speech that was, when I think back, and it's a story I always tell when I talk to the business school students at ASU, when I think back to, like, was there a moment, like that one moment where you became an entrepreneur? This was the moment. He was visiting me in Arizona. I took him on a drive up north to some, couple of hours away, where there's some really nice hiking and some great sights to see. And we stop in this tiny little artist colony town up in the mountains of Arizona, and there's a little coffee shop there. And so we sit down, and he looks at me and he says, "So do you want me to give you the secret to life?" And I'm like, who says no to that? Yeah, bring it. Let me hear the secret to life. And so he kind of crouches down to, like, almost like pretend like, he doesn't want anyone else to hear. And he sort of motions to the other people in the room. And he says, "So you see all these people over here?" He goes, "They have the same inventory of hours each day as you and me." He said, "The difference between me and them is they're selling their time for money. And you see that guy, and he points to the barista, behind the counter. He goes, he's selling his for, $5 an hour. And he goes, look, Craig, you're a smart guy. You're a patent attorney. Maybe you can sell yours for, a couple of $100 an hour. But at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in the day. And if you're selling it for money, there's only so much money you can make. But as an entrepreneur, you can leverage your time in an exponential way to make money that's not sort of correlated to, your hourly rate. And there was just a certain beauty to that logic. And it was really powerful to me. And I just was like, it clicked. And I was like, that sounds good. That's for me. So with his encouragement and this crazy hostile takeover, I become the president of this company that really I have almost zero background or knowledge in. And one of my favorite things I love saying to the business school students is there's not a single person in this room who knew less about business than I knew, when I sort of became responsible for this company. It was manufacturing, it was product development, it was, R&D, it was regulatory, it was sales and marketing, it was distribution. I mean, things that I didn't know anything about and had no experience in. And so I did, in essence, what my brother did. I brought someone else in who had a lot of those skills to run the company. But over the next 6 months, I started to see I didn't quite feel like that person, entirely was making what I thought were the right decisions. And I didn't understand some of their decisions. And Ellie kind of kept encouraging me. And then he was the first person to say, Craig, maybe you should be the one running the company. And at first that just seemed insane to me. Like I'd been providing legal services to clients for 10 years. Like what do I know about all of those things? But he was very supportive and was like, you're a smart guy, you'll figure it out. And so I leaned heavily on him and called him every day, probably for the better part of 1 to 2 years, with questions. Hey, I got this situation, I got that situation. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I kept reading books. I kept going to my CEO groups. And the crazy thing is when I took over the controller, we had 8 employees and the controller said we'd be out of cash in 2 weeks. And we were locked in this kind of death struggle with the FDA. And ultimately, it's funny. I remember we had to use our vendors as our line of credit. We couldn't pay our vendors until we got paid from our customers. And it was just sort of this giant, game of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. But we, I was very fortunate. I was able to hire some really smart people. I had, Ellie's tremendous mentorship, and we defeated. So the crazy thing is we defeated the FDA in federal court. It's probably the thing I'm most proud of. Wow. Is that I ended up meeting with FDA 4 times and the MHRA in the UK, they're the FDA equivalent twice, and Health Canada twice. But we really created the regulatory framework for a whole new category to exist. In this interesting field that's become kind of controversial, this electronic nicotine delivery field, I can say from my perspective, I was totally focused on the fact that you had, basically at the time I started at Enjoy, the smoking rate in the United States had actually been increasing in 2008 and 2009. And in 2010, over 20% of the adults in the United States were smokers, over 40 million Americans. And the World Health Organization had come out and said, over 1 billion human beings were going to die this century from smoking. And I thought, this is nuts. I mean, nicotine's not carcinogenic. Nicotine's an FDA-approved drug in the patch and the gum. It's the delivery system that's toxic and carcinogenic.
You're smoking it into your lungs.
Yeah, you're burning this organic material and you're lighting this stuff on fire and you're breathing all this horrible, crap into your lungs. And I thought, well, wait a second, if we can create technology to give the over 1.3 billion people on the planet who are already addicted to nicotine, the same nicotine that they crave, but in a non-toxic delivery system. I was like, this is like the greatest public health opportunity of the century. I mean, you have almost 500,000 Americans dying every year from tobacco-related illness. And so it's a huge number. It's over 1,000 a day, right? So I got kind of obsessed with that idea of we're a public health company. We're a biotech company. We're basically going to save more lives than Pfizer. And so with that kind of the power of that, sort of technology and argument, I was able to recruit the 17th Surgeon General of the United States to serve on our board of directors. And my chief scientist, had an MD, PhD from Stanford and was a full tenured professor of biochemistry at Princeton and was on the Stand Up to Cancer team. And, my chief of regulatory came from Johnson & Johnson and was the head of their global efforts of, eradicating tobacco use. So
you put an amazing team together.
Yeah, no, it's just an amazing, amazing team. And, kind of little by little, it wasn't so little by little, we, in a really fast way, we grew tremendously. And so, so I ended up getting my first private equity investment in 2011, and we raised $30 million at an $80 million pre-money valuation. And that was like, oh wow, like this is now like we're a real company. And then we grew and grew and grew, and then raised $75 million from a group that included Sean Parker and Fidelity at a $425 million valuation, and then grew and grew and grew. And then a year later, raised $74 million at $1 billion valuation from Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, and a group part of Bain Capital. So it was this 3.5 year kind of insane rocket ship. And it was a wild time. It was an exciting time. We ended up manufacturing 80 million units of products that we distributed in about 130,000 retail locations all around the world. I ended up, with offices in 3 continents. We had, 130 employees. And the thing I'm most proud of is, not only when I left Enjoy in 2000, I went from CEO to chairman in 2014 and cycled off the board in 2015. The smoking rate was under 14% in the United States, which was such a precipitous decline. It was totally unfathomable to public health that the smoking rate could drop that. Again, it was going up, in 2008, 2009. So for it to drop that much was totally shocking. And I was excited that we were using technology, which is what I think great American companies do, to solve what had been previously thought to be just kind of an unsolvable problem. And, I still have people come up to me today like, oh my God, I was a pack-a-day smoker for 20 years and I tried the patch and I tried the gum and nothing worked. And I used your product to quit smoking. Like, thank you for saving my life.
It's powerful.
Yeah. And so, of course, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of, sort of publicity about youth access. And it fortunately is not about our company, my company's products, but one of our competitors. But what I would say is, that's part of why I'm no longer at Enjoy, was that in 2014, right when those people came in, the last group of institutional investors, it was really at a time when consumer, the consumer market was changing, and from our product, which looked exactly like a cigarette, to products that looked nothing like a cigarette, and that consumer preference to a different form factor really, caused our company to miss our numbers. And at the end of the day, when you're the CEO, the buck stops with you. And so the new investors were wanting one of their, a CEO of their choosing to come in. And so I was, politely asked to step aside, which I did. And so that was, for me, a bummer. I had no sooner been congratulated for, creating a unicorn, a privately held, company with $1 billion valuation, than I was sort of shown the door. So that was a good life lesson for me. And fortunately, I had not allowed the success of Enjoy to kind of infect my personality or become too closely identified with who I was as a person. And it was helpful to have a very down-to-earth wife who never let my head get too big. And so when it went away, it was a bummer, but it wasn't like the loss of an identity for me. So, but yeah, so it was this wild ride. I mean, during the heyday, I was speaking at conferences, I was getting interviewed, I was on television almost every week with, CNN and Fox and MSNBC and CNBC and, front page of the Wall Street Journal and the front page of the business section of the New York Times. And in just, one thing after another, it was just a total wild ride.
Your wife would have to deflate your head on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, she's about the least materialistic person I've ever met. So she really could care less about, all of those successes.
Like, Craig, yeah, I know you were on the front page. Go do the dishes. I don't.
Well, it's funny, I mentioned that the board certified neurosurgeon that I'm friends with. So he married like his high school sweetheart, and his wife, of course, knew him before he became a board certified neurosurgeon. And she's like the most lovely, down to earth person ever. And she used to tell a story to my wife and I that my wife absolutely loved, which is that she'll still say to her husband, hey, Dan, I know it's not brain surgery, but can you take out the garbage? So yeah, there's definitely something that, that we gravitated towards.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that story. Take me up to present day. So how did you meet Blair? And so I want to talk about how this idea came about with Mouthguard Club, Retainer Club.
So, Blair and I have known each other for almost 20 years. He moved from Chicago to Phoenix, early 2000s. We met through our wives, actually. And my wife met his wife, who's actually Blair's wife's also a dentist, and so she's my dentist and he's my orthodontist. But we met through our wives, and Blair and I just really hit it off. And I used to joke with Blair that he was an entrepreneur trapped in the body of an orthodontist. He had these tremendous entrepreneurial instincts. And then he started a business on the side, and he tried another business on the side. And he, excuse me, he was always kind of had that, he was an early adopter of technology. He was always kind of on the cutting edge. And I really tried to encourage that. I had him join one of my CEO groups, and I just thought it was remarkable for someone that was in a profession that, isn't entirely known for its entrepreneurship to embrace entrepreneurship. And so we became really good friends. And about, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he came to me with this idea, and it was sort of just as I was transitioning out of Enjoy. But he said, "Look, I have this idea I want to run by you." And he had a front row seat for this crazy, rocket ship Enjoy ride. And so he said, the standard of care in orthodonture is, when you have either braces or Invisalign, you're done with treatment, you're supposed to wear a retainer when you sleep at night for the rest of your life. And if you don't, your teeth are going to move. And of course, anybody who's, kind of the age that Blair and I are in knows this to be true, because we probably had braces like me when I was a kid, and we didn't wear a retainer and our teeth moved. And I ended up having to go back to Blair for, Invisalign treatment as an adult. And so he said, "Look, no one really wears their retainer forever, because eventually the thing gets gross, or you break it, or you lose it, or the dog eats it. And the process of getting it replaced is just kind of a nightmare. It's just a big bag of hurt. You got to either track down your original orthodontist or find a new one. And you have to do these horrible impressions where there's goo and you're gagging on it. And, it's multiple appointments, and it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And so people just don't do it. They just blow it off." And so he said, "Look, my idea is basically like Dollar Shave Club for retainers, retainer club. So brand new retainer shows up in the mail once a year, $99, throw away the old one, pop in the new one." I'm like, "Wow, I think that's a great idea." And he's like, "Yeah, there's really no kind of subscription, model in the whole field of orthodonture." And so I said, "Okay, well, so like, how does it work?" And so he walks me through this kind of fascinating sort of process that, there's a couple of key pieces of technology that are relatively new, not brand new, but, like last 10 years, kind of new, that have made this possible. One is what's replaced the goo is this 3D scanner, and there's various tech companies that make this technology, but it's in the $20,000 to $30,000 range for one of these 3D scanners, and it's just a high grade set of sort of cameras that take these pictures of your teeth that are super accurate. And what I learned sort of getting all this information from Blair is that the accuracy of the alginate impressions that are taken with the goo there's a lot of error. with that, which is something that the do-it-yourself orthodonture companies are discovering as they mail people kits. And there's a high error rate. They're not entirely accurate. They're dependent on humidity and how long you're keeping it in, how easily you're taking it out. Whereas the scanners are like perfect. They kind of almost can't make a mistake. Technology's so amazing and hyper accurate. So those scanners are now, whereas Blair was an early adopter maybe 10 years ago, today, the majority of orthodontists in the United States have a 3D scanner, and tens of thousands of dentists have them too. So that was sort of one of the key pieces of technology. And the other was 3D printing. So again, 3D printing's been around for a while, but not in a low cost enough way. And so Blair walks me through, you take a scan and we become we're a drop down menu on the scanner. And so we literally would get the scan in real time from anyone in the world. And then we can 3D print a mold and then make these retainers. And eventually Blair said, look, you can use the exact same technology more or less for making mouth guards, custom mouth guards for people who play sports. And so the more I learned about all of this, the more I thought there was just this amazing opportunity, because I thought, first of all, we're not trying to create a new behavior that doesn't exist, right? Everybody wears their retainer, the first night after they get their braces off, or, when they complete treatment. The problem isn't, getting them to start, it's getting them to continue, because not only does the thing get gross or they break it or they lose it, but there's sort of no one left to manage compliance in the system, because they're, unlike dentists, people only have a 2-year relationship with their orthodontist, and then that's it. They kind of never see them again. And so, we talk about it, and I sort of say, start giving Blair some ideas that are just kind of coming to me, like, oh, what you should do is you should partner with orthodontists around the country and offer this service to them. And, basically they probably don't even want to be in the retainer business. They'd rather spend all their time actually treating patients. And Blair had told me a story that really reinforced that, which was, he said, look, I only have a 2-year relationship, unlike the dentists who might get a lifetime relationship, but it's a great 2-year relationship. It kind of, starts maybe with people's, not happy with their smile. And then, over these 2 years, we're giving them an amazing smile, and it ends, if anything, on a high note. And he goes, it's a great, great relationship. And he goes, 95% of the time I never see them again. But he said, unfortunately, in the 5% of the time that I do see them again, it's not a great relationship. What ends up happening is they're unhappy. Their teeth have moved. They're frustrated because they spent so much money with me. And I go from being kind of a sweet orthodontist to being a private investigator. Well, have you been wearing your retainer? Why'd you stop? How come you didn't call us? And he said, it becomes almost adversarial, and it's really unpleasant. And so he said, look, something like Retainer Club would really solve that problem. And so I thought, I think this is a wonderful idea. And so I start kind of giving him some ideas, and he's like, look, I've had this idea for 2 years. I haven't done anything with it. What do you say we partner 50-50? And I was like, sold, let's do it. So, going into business with one of your best friends, I think is either going to be
uncharted
the greatest
waters.
It's uncharted waters. It's either going to be the greatest thing or like a catastrophe. So I can happily say, over 3 years in now with Blair, it's really been just totally awesome. And as I've said before, having a true partner, just like I think in a good marriage, it makes the highs higher and it makes the lows higher. You're not alone. You've got someone to sort of share the burdens with, and you got someone to share the high moments too. So we started off. I said, look, let's start beta testing with your patients. That doesn't cost us anything. And excuse me, one year in, we discovered a couple of unbelievable things. First of all, his patients loved it. There's a couple of funny things, and some of them probably some people don't want to admit, which is, one of the things I love about Blair is his ability to be self-aware. And so he said, look, none of my patients wants to come into my office. Like, they don't really want to come here to see me. They don't want to, take time out of their day or out of their school or work and drive. And even if it's a 5-minute appointment, it's not 5 minutes for them. They got to drive here. They got to park. They got to come in, they got to wait. And so they really don't want to come see me for a retainer. right? Like post-treatment, it's such a simple thing. And, we learned that just telling his patients, no, you don't need to come in. We've got your scan on file. We'll just send you a new one. They were just like, really? I don't have to come in? Like this is awesome. And so that was super reinforcing. So we had a bunch of, we had over 150, happy paying subscribers at the end of the first year. But then we learned something else that was even more kind of remarkable, which was, as Blair was letting his patients know about $99 retainers with Retainer Club, half a dozen of his former patients who had stopped wearing their retainer, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, their teeth had moved and they needed new treatment. And so they became new patients again, or new cases, which was a tremendous amount of new revenue for his practice. And I realized what a valuable kind of value proposition for a partner is that not only are we going to kind of get this sort of retainer business off your plate so you can focus all your time on treatment, you're going to get new patients out of this, or new case starts out of this, not just from your existing former patients, but also we're going to advertise and we're going to send people to you. Hey, did you lose your retainer? Hey, dog eat your retainer? And when we send those people to your office to get scanned for 5 minutes, some of them are going to become new patients of yours. And so it's been a blast. It's been totally a lot of fun. And I love kind of building a business from the ground up. And so, yeah, it's been great. And Mouthguard Club is fascinating because it's on the one hand very similar technology, but on the other hand, it's a completely different product, because retainer clubs for people who've had orthodontic treatment, Mouthguard clubs for anybody who plays contact sports. And so you've got 40 million mouth guards sold in the US every year. You got all these people playing sports that require mouth guards, like football and hockey and lacrosse, but you've also got plenty of people wearing them for basketball and soccer and other sports. And with the mouth guards, we can totally trick them out, full customization, colors, logos, jersey numbers, anything people want. And kids in particular have a blast doing that. It's so much fun. And so that's been a ton of fun too.
Craig, amazing. This journey that you've been on. And I want to kind of wrap up with where we should point people towards. And I know at the front of the interview, we talked about, obviously this is a technology that helps patients. It also helps grow dental offices and orthodontic offices, which is, a win-win-win, and keeping people's smiles and teeth in check, hence in your face. So I'll mention, people can go to retainerclub.com/partner, or mouthguardclub.com/partner. Any other places we should point people online to check out?
So, I mean, those are great. And so the partner sides of those websites will tell orthodontists and dentists all about the benefits of being a partner. Of course, we've got the In Your Face podcast that they can download and check out, where Blair and I are interviewing some of the leading entrepreneurs and other people in the orthodontic and dentist space that are making a difference. And we have partnerships now that are kind of cool because they're extending outside of orthodontists and dentists. We've got a partnership with local ice hockey rinks here in Arizona. We're hopefully about to announce some partnerships with some hockey schools in the United States, and so we're really trying to provide dentists and orthodontists with a steady stream of people who are going to be showing up in their office to get a scan, but probably need a dentist or probably need an orthodontist. And, we think it's a real partnership. Our goal is to be the orthodontist or dentist's best friend. We never want to compete with them. We don't move teeth. That's the job of the dental professionals. We're not a fan of the do-it-yourself orthodonture out there. And so, to me, it's a great partnership because we can help take care of a dentist or orthodontist patients, post-treatment, when they've already had their treatment and their teeth have been straightened, but also get what is kind of a annoying aspect of their practice off their plate and replace that with a much more lucrative aspect of their practice, which is new patients and new case starts. So I think it's a win-win. I think it's a win-win-win because it's a win for their patients too, who get straight teeth for life and or better referral sources. I think it's a win for the practices, and I think it's a win for us. So I believe in that kind of win-win philosophy generally. And so and we're doing some. We're trying to be really innovative. So one of the things we're excited about now, we have these great digital kiosks that we're putting into the waiting rooms of our partner offices, where adults and kids can kind of customize their mouth guards while they're waiting, and then boom, they can get scanned 5 minutes later. They're already there. So people are really, having a lot of fun with the kiosks. We'll be at the, AAO, the American Association of Orthodontists conference every year. And so, and you can always, just find us on the web.
Awesome. Everyone check out the website, retainerclub.com. If you are a patient, find an office near you, or retainerclub.com/partner, or mouthguardclub.com/partner. Craig, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jeremy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.